Well, things are moving fast and furious in the college football world, as I think most of you are already aware. We haven't even had the 12-team playoff yet. They're already talking about a 14-team playoff. I'm sure you've probably heard about this already, but let's go ahead, take a look really quick and see what we've got. Apologies for using ESPN. It was just the easiest thing I could find instead of jumping through people's tweets and stuff like that. Basically, what happens in the current structure, the structure that hasn't begun yet, the 5 highest ranked conference champions are guaranteed a spot in the bracket, which is kind of hard when one of the conferences doesn't exist anymore, and the 4 highest ranked conference winners will earn a first round bye. But some sources say that there is a 14-team model under discussion that would give the SEC and the Big Ten 3 automatic qualifiers each, and then only 2 byes, and the only 2 byes for their conference champions, which is interesting. We can go into a little bit more detail about this. It's sort of like a playoff on top of another playoff and all of this stuff. I'll put it to you this way, right? I don't know if you followed this or not. If you did follow all the talk about the European Super League a couple years ago in association football over in Europe, you probably know how most fans feel about this sort of thing. There's a tendency among fans, I think, everywhere in the world to want to see teams rewarded for performing well on the field instead of just getting in because of who they are or what their connections are. That's what this is, right? This is the SEC and the Big Ten trying to allow more teams in their conference to get into this playoff structure because they're the SEC and the Big Ten, right? Now, I'm going to tell you that there's unfortunately nothing that you or I can do about this. And what is likely to happen in the future is, even in the very near future, is that the ACC and eventually the Big 12 will be ripped apart by the SEC and the Big Ten. That's what's really going on here. This is sort of like a little, raft or a little boat or something they're going to throw out to the remaining conferences that are not part of the big boys until the TV money comes back in to sort of rip them apart and, continue to change the financial world of college football. We'll go take another look here quickly at this article. You can see right here, the revenue as part of this agreement would allow the SEC and Big Ten to earn maybe 25 to 30% of the college football playoff revenue. Then would come the ACC and Big 12 with about 15 to 20%. And note that the ACC and Big 12, by having fewer teams in the playoff, have a smaller chance of actually winning the thing, right? And then there's a smaller chunk for maybe 6 to 10% for other leagues and maybe 1% for Notre Dame, right? This is what we're talking about. It's all about the revenue issues. I know that people have been talking on forums, on YouTube, and everywhere about Notre Dame and how, well, Notre Dame will stay independent pretty much no matter what. Now, you know what? If you want Notre Dame to join your conference, give them a deal like this, where they don't get any money, right? Because if there's no money involved and if they don't have a realistic chance of winning anything that matters, recruitment goes down, and then it doesn't really matter how much, fame and how much lore there is behind your program, it will completely fall apart. We forget about this. We forget that Army football had a real big decade in the 50s. We forget that the Ivy League schools were such an integral part of college football that when you go back to the 30s and the 40s and even into the 50s, they would routinely be ranked despite not playing anybody, right? That's part of the problem. If you take away the ability of these schools that are kind of different from the other schools to, make money and be competitive, then you're going to force them into acting. Now, there's a big question that I have about this. There's no doubt in my mind, as I just said, that what we're going to see is the continued growth of the Big Ten and of the SEC at the expense of everything else. I mentioned this last week. I'm a BYU fan. I grew up a BYU fan, right? It's kind of in my blood. I know what it feels like to be on the outside looking in. What I'm going to tell you is that as nice as it is to have BYU in the Big 12, it feels like the WAC all over again, or like the Mountain West all over again, right? Because we're part of the group that's not quite the big boys, they're second tier. Eventually, the Big Ten will continue to expand. I think there's a great chance of Florida State's going up there. Once that happens, and once the SEC's territory is sort of infringed upon, then you're going to see the SEC say, fine, we're going to rip apart the ACC, and then it's only a matter of time before the Big 12 goes down. But the big wild card here that nobody's talking about, The thing that makes no sense to me is the money, right? I know that ESPN threw silly money at the SEC, right? We know that Fox Sports is throwing silly money over the Big Ten, right? But it can't keep up. It's not sustainable, right? Look, they're not here right now, but I have two sons. I have a son who's 14 and a son who's 8. They don't watch college football at all. They don't watch any football, right? Not because I don't allow them to. They can watch all the football they want as far as I care, but it's because we don't have television networks at home. Why don't we have TV networks at home? Because it's a huge expense, and I'm not going to pay that much money for entertainment, especially when most of the stuff I want to watch can be had for free if you know where to go, right? This is the problem, right? It may be the case that people in my dad's generation are happy to continue paying big money for cable television deals and for, DirecTV and for all of this other stuff. But people who are younger, people in their 30s, 20s, and younger than that are not going to pay the money. This is the real problem that college football has. It's absolutely insane to me that these major networks are more than willing to completely rip up the landscape of college football and try to turn it into NFL light, when the real problem that they face is that I have children at home that don't watch the sport at all, right? You have to figure out a way to make sure that the future generation is interested in the sport and remains interested in the sport. That's the thing that's big, and that's the thing that's the real kicker, right? This NFL and the Super Bowl and all of that is going to be fine, right? The Super Bowl had just insane ratings recently. But the college football playoff, if it continues to not attract fans, and if it continues to have these bogus matchups between teams that already played each other once or twice in the regular season, the college football playoff will not attract those fans. And as this continues, and as we move forward into the future, you're going to see a lot of problems happen because of the insane amount of money that has been promised to these conferences, right? It's bizarre to me, absolutely bizarre, that ESPN, which is having so many problems attracting an audience on anything that is not live sports, it's incredible to me that they would throw that much money out on a college football contract, right? I mean, it's just absolutely insane. You look at this and you think, why don't they spend the money and the time trying to fix these internal problems instead of just throwing a whole ton of it over and trying to change the landscape of college football? What do I worry about here? What I really worry about is that 30 years from now or so, the college football world will be completely different than what I grew up with. It'll be basically minor league football. It will be only sort of like nominally connected to any sort of school. All the rivalries will be gone and nobody will care because of how badly the sport was mismanaged, right? We've already lost the Pac-12, right? We're going to lose the ACC next. Eventually you'll have two super conferences trying to divide up the entire country, but who's going to watch? And that's the real problem, and that's the real tragedy. I don't know how you feel. I personally don't like massive playoffs. I know that the powers that be want to have another March Madness for football, right? I know that they look at Champions League in Europe and think we should do that for college football. It makes sense to a certain extent, but I'm going to tell you that the prospect of watching teams that couldn't even win their conference play against each other in the postseason is just not attractive to me at all, right? This is part of the problem with the bowl system in recent years, right? Too many bowl games featuring a whole bunch of teams that were not quite good enough and don't really care enough to put on much of a show. That's a big issue, and that's a big problem. As much fun as it is to have massive playoffs and have every team invited, the more teams you invite, the less the regular season matters, and also the less sort of must-watch TV your playoff ends up being. Anyway, that's just my take on it, right? I've mentioned this before with this project I'm setting up with Action PC Football. My take is that I want to create something that's not going to have some massive playoff and that will make at least some regional sense. I'd love to know what you think. Let me know down below. We'll talk more about it then. Talk to you later. Bye.